The year is 2010. A man named Dr. Umar Johnson steps forward with a bold dream. He promises to raise money for the first ever school built to educate and uplift young black boys. The idea spreads fast. People rally to the cause. And over the next decade, donations pour in. By 2020, more than $1.6 million is collected. For many families, this was not just charity, it was sacrifice. Parents gave from paychecks. Grandmothers mailed small envelopes of cash. Supporters believed they were investing in a safe future for their sons, a future built on pride and hope. But then the dream takes a darker turn. On August 5th, 2025, officials quietly tape a foreclosure notice on the doors of the promised school. The news spreads like fire. The shock is heavy. How could millions in donations vanish into silence? How could a promise built on unity collapse into unpaid bills and broken trust? The challenge is now urgent. Unless $72,000 is paid, the doors will be sold, and with them, the dream of FDMG Academy dies. If you want more stories that dig beneath the headlines, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned. So the mystery remains. How did a $1.6 million promise collapse into foreclosure? The story begins with a vision. In 2010, Dr. Umar Johnson takes the stage with fiery speeches. He declares that he will build a school unlike any other, a fortress of education, a Pan-African stronghold named the Frederick Douglass Marcus Garvey Academy. The message is clear. Black boys deserve their own place of pride, a place to be taught by their own, for their own. For struggling parents, it sounds like salvation. In neighborhoods where schools fail, Umar's promise feels like hope. And the movement begins. Over the next decade, donations pour in. By 2019, the total crosses more than $1.6 million. The numbers are staggering, but the real story lies in the sacrifice. Single mothers mailed checks. Barbershops passed around jars. Churches opened their doors and fundraised for him. People gave what they could. Some gave their last $50, not because they had extra, but because they believed in a dream of freedom through education. Finally, in 2019, Umar makes his first big move. He buys not one, but two abandoned school buildings in Wilmington, Delaware. The price? Just $400,000. The community celebrates. The vision looks real. The dream feels alive. The speeches seem fulfilled. But here, the twist begins. If the buildings cost $400,000 and the total raised was over $1.6 million, that leaves more than $1.2 million unaccounted for. Where did it go? What was spent? What was saved? And why, with millions raised, are supporters still waiting for the doors of FDMG to open? The buildings are bought. The people are waiting. By 2019, supporters expect action. They imagine fast renovations, fresh paint, desks in classrooms, teachers walking the halls, children finally entering a school of their own. But the reality is very different. Months pass, then years, and the doors of FDMG remain shut. No classrooms, no students, no teachers, just silence and locked gates. The questions begin to grow louder. Where is the money? Donors had poured in over $1.6 million, but now with the buildings bought for just $400,000, they expect to see progress. Instead, they see weeds growing outside and windows still broken. Frustration builds. Supporters who once cheered begin to whisper. Barbershops and churches that once collected donations now ask a painful question. Where's the money? The pressure lands on Umar, and his answer is not what people expect. He does not point to budgets or receipts. Instead, he blames red tape. He blames the system. He blames sabotage. He says forces are working against him, delaying the dream. But doubts continue to spread. By 2021, the whispers turn into public criticism. Videos appear online. Former supporters speak out, and the cracks in the dream grow wider. The story is no longer just about hope. It is now about trust. And the trust is starting to break. So the question rises, could these cracks have been the first clear sign of collapse? The years move forward, but the buildings stay the same, empty, vacant, silent. By 2021, the dream of FDMG no longer looks like a school. It looks like two abandoned shells. The walls fade, the windows crack, Graffiti spreads across the bricks. What was promised as salvation now sits as ruin. And for the neighbors living nearby, the pain cuts deep. They were told this would bring life to the block. Instead, they see decay. Where hope should rise, weeds take over. Where children should play, silence lingers. But the damage is not just to the eye. It is on the books. Utility bills pile up. Vacant property fines grow month after month. By 2023, the debt climbs past $72,000. Every missed payment pushes the school closer to danger. And yet Umar still takes the stage with promises. He announces opening dates. He names the seasons when doors will swing open. But each date passes. Each promise fades. And supporters grow restless. The tension builds. Because what was once called a dream school now becomes a symbol of delay. A project frozen in time. A promise that no longer feels real. And the question grows louder with each year. Where is the money? Where is the school? And how long before the truth is revealed? The cracks are no longer hidden. They are wide and visible. The world is watching. And by 2023, the stage is set for a breaking point. So the question becomes clear. What happened on August 5th, 2025? That exposed everything. The date is August 5th, 2025. The dream meets its harshest reality. On a quiet Delaware morning, a city worker walks up to the doors of the promised school. In his hands is a thin piece of paper. He tapes it to the front entrance. The words are blunt. Foreclosure auction. The FDMG Academy is about to be sold, not to celebrate its grand opening, but to cover years of unpaid debts, utility bills, property fines, vacant building fees. Together, more than $72,000 owed. And here lies the shocking detail. Umar never told his followers. No warning, no message, no transparency. The world learns the truth not from Umar, but from a random passerby who sees the sign and posts it online. Within hours, the news spreads. Screenshots fly across social media. Supporters stare in disbelief. Panic sweeps through the community. People who gave their last $50 feel betrayed. The dream they funded now looks like a public scandal. And for the first time, the empire is collapsing in plain sight. There is no hiding. No stage to control the narrative. Only a piece of paper taped to a door, announcing to the world that the FDMG Academy is about to be lost. The movement that once promised salvation is now one step from auction. The collapse is not whispered. It is written for everyone to see. So the question burns. When the truth finally came out, how did Umar Johnson respond? Just hours after the auction notice went public, Umar Johnson appeared on Instagram Live. His voice was fiery, his tone defensive. He told thousands of viewers that this was not his fault. According to him, the government had frozen his accounts. No money could move. No bills could be paid. The reason? He said the FBI, the CIA, city officials, and even what he called struggle streamers were all working against him. They wanted the FDMG Academy to fail. They wanted him to be silenced. But then came the detail that caught everyone's attention. Umar revealed that his accounts were frozen before the foreclosure news broke. That meant he already knew trouble was coming. Supporters began to whisper, was this live stream just damage control? Did he go public to shape the story before the facts destroyed him? The comments filled with fire. Some typed, "We still believe." Others wrote, "Where's the money?" The division was clear. For some, Umar's passion was enough to explain everything. For others, it sounded like another round of excuses. The man who once promised salvation was now in a digital battle for trust. Every sentence he spoke carried a heavy weight, but behind the words was a growing doubt. The community was asking harder questions. The supporters who once mailed checks and held fundraisers now wanted proof. And Umar Johnson was no longer just fighting bills. He was fighting the collapse of his own credibility. So the question now, after all the speeches, all the promises, and now this live stream, did his followers still believe him? For more than a decade, Umar Johnson's followers stood by his side. They defended him against every critic. They called him the Prince of Pan-Africanism. They believed the FDMG Academy would one day open its doors. Many of them were single mothers who mailed in checks. Some were barbers who raised money in their shops. Others were churches that saw him as a man of faith. These were his day ones. But now, everything was different. The auction notice changed the game. Even his most loyal voices began to whisper the same painful question. Where's the $1.2 million? The trust that once felt unshakable was starting to crack. Some followers still shouted, "Stand with Umar," but others no longer held back. They called the dream school a scam. They said the money was gone. The anger spread across social media. Clips of Umar's Instagram Live were cut, shared, and mocked. The louder he defended himself, the more doubts seemed to grow. It was no longer just outsiders attacking him. It was the very community that once protected him. The division ran deep. Every live stream, every tweet, every appearance was met with both cheers and jeers. Umar's name no longer carried the same unquestioned power. His credibility was hanging by a thread. And everyone watching wondered the same thing. How would Umar Johnson respond to this storm? What desperate move would he make to save face and his fading empire? When the walls began to close in, Umar Johnson turned to his followers once more. He went live and made a dramatic announcement. He didn't need the full $72,000. He only needed $30,000. And he needed it fast, in just 13 days. This, he claimed, would be enough to stall the auction. Just enough to keep the doors of the FDMG Academy from being locked forever. The request sent shockwaves through his base. After raising $1.6 million over more than a decade, Umar was asking for even more. He told his supporters this was the time to rise, not just with donations, but with action. He urged them to protest, to march, to even fly into Delaware and surround the buildings, to show the world that the dream of FDMG was not dead. But here was the problem. Protests don't pay bills. The city didn't want chance. It wanted cash. And critics wasted no time pointing it out. They called his plan desperate. They said this was nothing but another stall tactic. They asked the same haunting question. If $1.6 million couldn't save the school, how would $30,000? The tension grew by the day. Umar's live streams grew longer. His pleas grew louder. His critics grew sharper. And the deadline moved closer. Every hour that passed, the future of FDMG felt more uncertain. To some, Umar was still a man fighting for his dream. To others, he was exposing the very weakness of his leadership. Because if a leader with millions raised couldn't pay basic fees, what did that say about the dream itself? By August 2025, the story of Umar Johnson was no longer about one school. It was about a pattern. For more than 10 years, supporters had seen the same cycle repeat. First, Umar would create a crisis. Next, he would blame his enemies, the government, the FBI, city officials, or so-called haters. And then without fail, he would ask for more donations. It was his playbook. And for a long time it worked. Crowds believed him. They sent in checks. They defended him online. They marched when he called. But now the cracks were too wide to ignore. After 10+ years and more than $1.6 million raised, there was still no classroom, no teachers, no students. The buildings sat empty. The debts grew larger. And the dream of the FDMG Academy began to feel less like hope and more like a mirage. For many parents who had trusted him with their last $50, the pain was heavy. They had believed they were buying a future for their sons. Instead, they saw broken promises taped to a foreclosure door. Even Umar's most loyal followers began to whisper, was this really about a school? Or was it always about him? The emotional bond was breaking. The trust that had kept him alive was falling apart. Because once you see a cycle clearly, you cannot unsee it. The dream felt dead. The trust felt broken. And for the first time, the FDMG faithful began to admit the unthinkable. Maybe there was never going to be a school. Maybe this was always just the cycle. The final truth is clear. If you raise $1.6 million and still lose the school, the problem is not sabotage. It is leadership failure. For years, Umar Johnson pointed to enemies, red tape, and haters. But the real enemy was inside, his lack of accountability. The shocking twist came in 2025. Instead of rebuilding trust, Umar's desperate damage control on Instagram destroyed the little faith his supporters still held. Every excuse felt weaker. Every promise sounded emptier. And the dream of the FDMG Academy slipped away for good. The moral is painful, but undeniable. Passion without accountability collapses. The emotional truth is this: No matter how fiery the speeches, no matter how inspiring the words, a leader who hides the numbers cannot be trusted. This story is not just about Umar Johnson. It is about every movement that demands accountability. So if you want more deep dives into stories that expose the truth behind the headlines, subscribe now and tell me, do you think Umar's school was ever real? Or was it always a scam from the very beginning?